Now, hello, thank you very much for being with us on France 24. First, could you give us your reaction to those reports by the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights of civilians and journalists coming under Turkish fire near Ras Al-Ain?
Well, we've been very careful with civilian casualties. We've taken every measure to make sure that those casualties do not happen. Of course, we are now in the thick of the operation. The goal of which, obviously, is to clear our border with Syria from all terrorist elements. And we have given all the warnings. We have done all the diplomatic shuffling to explain to our allies as well as to other people to make sure that the PYD, YPG elements, which are an offshoot of the PKK, which is listed as a terrorist organization, are cleared from those areas. And of course, if you look at the overall picture, the operation is going well as planned. And we make sure that the civilians are not attacked. And we also make sure that the minority communities, including the Christians, are protected there. And as we have said before the operation began, we are not interested in occupying any part of Syria, and we are not interested in changing demographic structure of northeast Syria to the east of Euphrates. In fact, it was PYD, YPG that had changed the demographic structure by moving Arab villages and towns and people to flee forcefully to other places, and we are there to make sure that local people who had to flee their homes are safely to be able to return back to their homes.
Well, speaking of displaced people, a camp for displaced people was attacked again by Turkish fire today. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, no, actually, some of those reports are coming from the PYD, YPG angle from their side. In fact, you have to check it against the facts that our army provides. If you look at the overall narrative there in regards to this operation, the goal is clearly to clear these areas from all these terrorists. But if you look at some of the statements made by PYD, YPG elements there, that they're using civilians as human shields, which is actually a war crime. It's a horrible thing to do. And we are taking every measure to make sure that the civilians are not harmed in any way. In fact, so far we have eliminated over 500 PKK terrorists on the Syrian side. And this is the goal of the operation. And the overall picture, as I said, is that, of course, we are taking every measure to make sure that the civilians are not harmed. If there are exceptions to this, some violations or some manipulations or things like that, they will be obviously investigated and they will be made public also after the investigations is cleared.
That's right. You mentioned war crimes and violations. We are getting reports, including video reports, that your allies, the Syrian National Army, executed at least 9 civilians, including a female politician on Saturday in the town of Tal Abyad. Will you hold your allies accountable for any such war crimes?
As I said, this kind of actions will not be tolerated. They will be investigated. We have seen some of those reports. Of course, we don't have the full facts yet. We don't know what happened yet. But they will be investigated, certainly. But you have to be careful. Sometimes, such incidents are used to shed a cloud over the overall goal of this operation. I think your viewers need to know why Turkey has taken this step. We have spent a lot of time, many years, trying to explain to the world and to our allies that, in fact, these areas cannot be used by PKK terrorists as a corridor, as some kind of a state structure, some kind of an autonomous region to launch attacks on Turkey. We have had so many attacks on Turkey from the Syrian side used by these PYD, YPG elements. And, they've been supported and armed by the Americans, and this was actually a wrong-headed policy of the Obama administration. They armed them, financed them, trained them in the name of fighting Daesh. And we've said all along that you cannot eliminate one terrorist organization with another. PKK has launched a bloody terrorist attack on Turkey for many, many years, and now their Syrian branches are using Syrian soil to launch these attacks against Turkey from the Syrian side. And our president has made it clear over and over again that if our allies, NATO allies or others, do not act to stop these terrorist activities from the Syrian side against Turkey, then we will have to take those steps ourselves. And that's what we did on October the 9th. It's also, I think, important to note that these groups have a very clearly separatist agenda. If you're talking about the territorial integrity and political unity of Syria, then those kind of agendas, actors, should not be at the table. They should not be supported. They're not legitimate actors. And I think it's very clear. If you look at the reports by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch published 2 years ago, both reports pointed to possible war crimes by PYD, YPG in the areas which they had occupied, in Tel Abyad, in Jarablus, in parts of Manbij, and many other places. And in fact, I correct, not Jarablus, but Tel Abyad, Kobani, and a few other places where they forced local people to flee. And according to the reports, they razed some of these villages to the ground. So, in fact, it was PYD, YPG that changed the demographic structure of those places in the east of Euphrates there, not us. We are there to correct it. So some of these concerns about changing demographics or occupying parts of Syria or creating some kind of an instability, these are really groundless. We have cleared Jarablus area from the Daesh terrorists. We fought against Daesh in the Jarablus area, eliminated more than 3,000 of their terrorists. We have arrested, extradited or expelled thousands of them, in fact 15,000 of them over the last 2-3 years from the border, from other places. And we want to make sure also that Daesh or ISIS does not come back in any form or shape. Daesh is everybody's common enemy. It's a terrorist network, clear and simple. They don't represent Islam, just as PKK does not represent the Kurds. There are thousands of Kurds in Syria who do not subscribe to PKK's, PYD's Marxist-Leninist ideology. And it's really an irony of history that the United States and some European countries, including France, unfortunately, have picked up a Marxist-Leninist separatist organization in Syria as their ally.
Can we go to the US position, sir?
As allies, we thought it was Turkey.
Can we go to the US position? Speaking to CBS,
yes.
The US Defense Secretary Mark Esper has indicated that the US has learned that Turkey intends to, quote, expand the attack further south than originally planned and to the west. How far into Syrian territory are you planning to go?
Well, as our president and President Trump discussed this issue some months ago, the idea of the safe zone includes the 20-mile or 32-kilometer area. This was the original idea, going all the way to the Iraqi border, so that we can clear that area from the terrorists and also create spaces for the Syrian refugees to go back to their homes voluntarily, safely, and in a dignified way. When President Trump made that announcement about 6-7 months ago, unfortunately, his military and security bureaucracy didn't listen. They came up with all kinds of excuses not to implement it. And then we had another round of negotiations with the Americans about this. Then we agreed on the safe zone. Again, the parameters, the depth of it, who's going to monitor it, all these issues, unfortunately, were left kind of in the air. I mean, we had good contacts with them, no doubt. But it was, what they proposed was not really to our satisfaction as far as our security arrangements are concerned.
So you're taking this further?
For the time being, the goal of this operation, the goal of this operation is to secure the 35-kilometer area so that we can clear the border from the terrorist elements and then create spaces for the refugees to go back to.
Okay, well, my last question is this. We're getting reports from Lebanese television, Al Mayadeen, that the Syrian army is set to enter the SDF-held town of Kobani and Manbij within 48 hours. Are you ready for all-out war with the Assad regime and possibly its allies?
Well, these are just reports. They need to be verified, obviously. We don't have direct contact with the Assad regime, with Damascus, but we have contact with the Russians and the Iranians. We continue the Astana process together with Russia and Iran. In fact, we work at the same time on finding a political solution to this conflict within the parameters of UN Security Council Resolution 2254, where we protect Syria's territorial integrity, political unity, and the hostilities, enable the refugees to go back and start the process of reconstruction. Now, we just established the Constitutional Committee, and they will have their first meeting at the end of this month. And then hopefully this process will lead to the further strengthening of the political process. So we will continue to be in touch with the Russians. Again, some of these reports, about the regime coming, to those areas. We shall see. We have to verify those reports. But I think it shows clearly that when it comes to PYD, YPG political agenda, they are ready to work with anyone. As long as it suits their purposes, they will work with Americans, with the Russians, or with others, with the regime, etc. In fact, they have had this, some kind of unwritten agreement with the regime. From the very beginning, they did not attack the regime did not attack them, while all these atrocities were carried out by both the Assad regime and by PYD and YPG in the east of Euphrates. So it clearly shows that they are not reliable partners. In fact, as I said, they are an extension of the PKK network.
Ibrahim Kalin, thank you very much for having spoken to us. To remind our viewers, you are Special Advisor and spokesperson for Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan.